So for our next segment, we are talking about the 4-day work week. This is a concept that has gained a lot of momentum in recent years, partially because people are really unhappy at their jobs.
Yeah.
So in 2020, 62% of people reported that they had experienced burnout often or extremely often in the 3 months prior to the study. And in 2021, 67% of workers reported that stress and burnout had increased since the pandemic. So
Yeah.
at the end of 2022, there concluded the largest ever study of the 4-day work week.
Yeah. And furthermore, before we go over that, in 2022, Gallup released a survey that found that 21% of employees, only 21% of employees, are engaged at work, and 33% of employees feel like they're thriving in their overall well-being.
Only 33%?
Only 33%.
Considering that most adults work?
Yeah,
Oh,
exactly.
that's terrible.
Yeah. Now, before we get into the study itself, I actually want to do a little bit of steel manning here.
Yeah,
Steel manning against the argument.
totally. I feel the same way because these are worries that I personally have about the 4-day work week.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So, some potential drawbacks about the 4-day work week. Number one, which I think this one's fairly intuitive, it doesn't suit all industries.
Yeah.
You know, there are some industries that really do need to be in business all 7 days. And that doesn't necessarily mean that every single person there is working all 7 of those days. But that does mean that you are probably going to have to hire more people in order to make sure that you're keeping up with that. So and also, you know, as we know from our frequent looks at various different approaches to running businesses, there are very few one size fits all.
Yeah.
All right. Part of the reason why I support unions so much is because unions often fight for better guidelines within their specific organization. You know, you can have better labor standards that are passed by Congress, and that's great. But at the end of the day, the people that know what works the best are the people that actually work for the industry, which is why having unions is so valuable.
Oh,
So,
that's such a great point.
So it's not necessarily a one size fits all. It absolutely doesn't suit all workers. I mean, you know, there are some employees out there that are perfectly okay with working 5 days a week and are perfectly cool with overtime. And you know what? Power to them, right? And in some cases, it can also increase costs because, you know, again, like we said, in some cases, in order to keep up with the demand, you're going to have to hire more staff, which is going to increase prices. And there have absolutely been some cases in which there have been companies that have attempted to do this, that have attempted some version of a 4-day work week, and it ended up actually lowering productivity and increasing burnout because they were doing like they were required to do more work with less time.
Yeah. And
Um,
that's
so
my
that does
big
happen.
personal worry, just generally speaking. Like, if I were to think about doing my work with one fewer day,
Yeah.
like that gets me sweating.
Yeah.
Because,
Yeah.
like, ultimately, at the end of the day, like, companies are not going to implement this unless there's some kind of bottom line benefit.
Yeah. Yeah. And also, like, in some ways, like to some extent or another, it might impact college education because we might say it's a 4-day instructional week. But then again, when you're a college professor, you know, your schedule kind of varies based on what your classes are. And on top of that, the only like official time that you put up is the time in the classroom and the time in office hours, which doesn't necessarily account for all of the time you spend grading. And you know any professor can tell you when you're a professor, like you try to find your own schedule, but especially towards the end, towards finals week, you're going to be grading on the weekends, you're going to be grading like whenever.
Yeah.
But you do kind of end up creating your own schedule when it comes to grading. So, you know, to some extent that would impact colleges, but you know, it's again, it's not necessarily a one size fits all.
Yeah.
Here's why it's still important, though, and here's why it's still good. So there was a study that was carried out that was in the UK by a group that is called Autonomy, and it was done alongside researchers from Boston College. All right,
And a nonprofit group called 4-Day Workweek Global.
yeah. So here's how it worked. There were 61 companies that were involved, and between those companies, there were about 2,900 workers. The study took place between June to December 2022. And prior to the start of it, they did 2 months of preparation for each of the participants, which meant that they were incorporating these workshops, coaching, mentorships, peer support in order to try to find specific ways of working smarter and not harder. Basically, the idea was we need to prepare for this because, to Michael's point earlier, and to one of the potential drawbacks of a 4-day work week, if you are given less time to do a project, then that can potentially increase burnout. But if you prepare yourself, you find ways of maximizing efficiency by, again, working smarter, not harder, and you give yourself plenty of time to prep so you're not just going straight from having 5 days to having 4 days, it can potentially maximize results. The idea behind this was what they referred to as a 100-80-100 policy, which again was also not a one-size-fits-all, because it was a one-size-fits-all in that you had to fulfill those percentages, and I'll break down what those percentages mean in just a second, but it was not a one-size-fits-all in that companies created their own versions of this. Like there wasn't a standardized version of it. Companies created their own version of it. So the 100-80-100 means that they had to do 100% of the work, meaning 100% of the productivity, 80% of the time for 100% of the payment. All right. So it's same payment, same work, but 80% of the time. They prepped for it. They did a 2-month prep period for each company. Each company created their own version of the 100-80-100 policy. And what they found, the results, were an undeniable success. Of the 81 companies that participated, 56 are continuing with the 4-day work week, and 18 have confirmed that it is now a permanent fixture. It is now a permanent policy in their company. Now you might think, well, but hold on, Nathan. If they had less time, then, well, weren't they also less efficient? Well, I'm glad you asked, listener, because no, they were not less efficient. In fact, interestingly enough, on average, it actually increased revenue by 1.4%, which, if you're increasing revenue with less work, that's called increasing efficiency.
Yeah. So this is the thing that I was most worried about prior to this study, which is like, again, as I said, like companies are not going to sign up for this. Yeah. And it's going to be hard to force them to do it unless we can show that on the bottom line, there is like either a insignificant impact or a benefit. And I had seen some of the productivity numbers, and it made me a little nervous because people were really focusing on productivity. But the problem is like productivity is output per unit of input, right? Yeah. It's like efficiency. So like you could have productivity go up, but because you're reducing the input enough, you could have total output go down as a result. And the fact that by reducing the work week by 20%, you need to have 25% increase in productivity on every given day, that's like a pretty high bar to meet, right? And so like you could pretty easily see a case where even though you increase productivity somewhat, you don't get all of that benefit back, right? You still have compromised output. But it was really encouraging to me that these companies appear to be seeing like pretty similar output despite the 20% reduction in input.
Yeah. Again, it's 100%, 80%, 100%. And that's exactly how it worked. And the bottom line, of course, that's the most important thing for the companies.
Mm-hmm.
But the most important things for us, actually, here's another important thing for companies. Before I get into the human benefits,
Mm-hmm.
here's another benefit. There was a 65% reduction in the number of sick days that were being taken.
Yeah, totally.
Like, which I find that very telling. That when you actually feel like you have a reasonable schedule,
Mm-hmm.
you're playing hooky less.
Yeah, totally. And like in addition, like there's a bunch of benefits even aside from total output, which is why I was like talking about the bottom line and not just like total like revenue or whatever. So the fact that the revenue is still like solid or even up a little bit means that like combined with all these cost benefits, you are really ending up ahead. The fact that
Yeah.
compared to the same period last year, the year before the study, like employees quitting was down 57%, which is
Yeah.
remarkable. Like turnover, the cost of turnover of having to hire new employees and find them and train them and all that stuff is really expensive. And so if you can reduce that by making working conditions better, you can save a ton of money. And at the same time, job applications were up 88%. So like they're going to be getting higher quality candidates that are wanting to work for them and fewer people trying to leave the company. These are very tangible benefits.
Yeah. And in terms of the human benefits, which I think that this is both a human benefit and a bottom line benefit, 71% of employees reported lower levels of burnout,
That's huge.
which that is huge. Again, that affects the bottom line, but that also like affects your overall interest in life.
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
in your work.
And your
Like,
ability to focus. I don't know about you. When I'm burned out, when I'm exhausted, I cannot keep my attention on my work. It's
yeah.
so difficult, and that makes
Yeah.
all the difference.
Yeah. No, I try to be really good in terms of grading,
Mm-hmm.
about not letting it affect it. But I I have honestly had some points where I was so burnt out that I was just like, that's a grammatical issue. I could highlight it and tell them they need to fix it, or I could just be like, you know what? I don't even like commas anymore. Fuck commas.
Yeah, I mean that's the thing. Like we're all human,
Yeah.
right? Reduced energy, reduced like increased stress, increased burnout. These affect our ability to pay attention, which affects the quality of our work and affects our efficiency. It affects our ability to care about the quality of our work, which affects both like, and it affects our creativity, reduces our ability to like come up with new ways of doing things. Overall, like burnout is a huge cost.
Yeah. And 39% of employees were less stressed,
Mm-hmm.
which is awesome. In terms of social life, for 54%, it was easier to balance work and household jobs. Employees were more satisfied with their household finances.
Mm-hmm.
60% of employees found an increased ability to combine their paid work with their care responsibilities. So, like being able to do things at home. 62% found it easier to combine work with social life.
Mm-hmm.
You're having an overall just more fulfilling life.
Yeah.
You're having a life that you are still producing the same amount of efficiency
Mm-hmm.
and the same amount of the product, but you're able to enjoy your time more outside of your job. Like, I don't know about you, even as somebody who does have a job that I love and is very fulfilled at my job, I know that at the end of a really long day that I've experienced a lot of burnout, it's sometimes hard for me to be social with my wife. Like it's
Yeah. Oh
sometimes
yeah.
difficult for
Yep.
me to have like meaningful conversations with her. Like I get home and she'll want to talk about like some personal thing and I'm like, I love you so much. I do not have the spoons for this.
Dude, I
you
get
know?
that so much.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Like difficult conversations are saved for the weekend, or they, you know, or we have them at times when I'm not in the mental space to be able to have them. Or like we often talk about like the transition period from work where I'm just like a different person entirely from like who I am
Yeah.
like at other times. It's like I sometimes am hesitant to even schedule any kind of social interaction in the evenings because
Yeah.
I'm so wrung out and stale that like I
Yeah.
feel like I'm not even like being like a fun person to hang out with.
Yeah.
Like being exhausted and stuff affects all parts of life.
Yeah. 100%.
Yeah.
And one of the things that I think is extremely important and also extremely telling and should be informative to people that support labor reform is that labor reform is not just about increasing salary and increasing benefits.
Mm-hmm.
I think that sometimes that is such a huge focus on discussions about labor reforms
Mm-hmm.
that we miss out on the fact that conditions are just as important.
Yeah.
Now, I'm not saying that pay isn't important. Pay absolutely is important. All right. People should be receiving money that is a living wage,
Mm-hmm.
and they should be receiving benefits that that keep them alive.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
That adequately compensate them for the labor that they put in.
Mm-hmm.
Like that is important. I'm not saying that's not important, but just as important are the conditions that people work. Because you know what,
Absolutely.
you could pay me like $3 million, but if it's a job that I am fucking miserable at
Mm-hmm.
and I barely get any time outside of that job to do anything, I'm going to have a miserable life.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
I'm much
absolutely.
like right now, I'm much happier having a relatively average salary at a job that I love doing
Mm-hmm.
than, than if it was like if I was working like every second of the day all the time for $1 million salary.
Yep.
And
Yeah.
it turns out there was a significant chunk of employees that were involved in this study that feel the same way. One of the biggest and most telling parts and telling statistics that I read was that 15% of the employees said that no amount of money would induce them to accept a 5-day work week schedule, which they were now accustomed to.
Wow.
15%. You could not pay them more to do that extra day.
Yeah.
15%. Now, that's not a majority, but that is still a chunk.
Yeah. Seriously.
Like, and I think that that's reasonable because, look at all these benefits that we listed about how much better it is for your personal life, for your mental health, for your physical health.
And it's better for your wallet.
Yeah.
Like if you don't have to commute that last day, you're saving money on transportation, you're saving money on childcare, which is enough to absorb a full salary in the United States, right?
Yeah.
You're like saving like, money on food. Like how many people don't have the wherewithal to make their food at home or whatever and have to buy lunch for 12 or 15 bucks every day? Like we're talking about serious savings. It costs a lot to go to work.
And not to mention, it saves the company money too. If you're working at an office job and the office is closed 3 days instead of 2 days, then that means like less electricity, less having to maintain the facilities. That reduces the amount of money that the company has to pay.
Yeah. And reduces the climate impact of people commuting and like keeping office buildings open as well, which is pretty substantial.
So I think that the critiques that I stated earlier, are definitely critiques that should be taken into account and should be considered when it comes to incorporating a policy such as this. It doesn't make the policy bad, though. It just means that there are concerns that you need to address. Like I said earlier, this specific experiment, this trial, had a 2-month period in which they were trying to make sure that each of the companies were coaching themselves and preparing themselves for that decrease in the amount of time that they were working. And on top of that, they created the 100-80-100 policy, but they let companies decide how they were going to incorporate it.
Yeah.
So if progressives and people that are, or just people who are pro-labor in general, are going to fight for this policy, fight for it smart.
Yes.
All right. Fight for a smart version of this policy.
Yeah.
Fight for a version of this policy that does take into account that there are some industries that do have to run 7 days a week, but of course, maybe that means that there are certain people that might not need to be there every single day of those week
Yeah.
of that week.
Yeah.
Which we already have standards regarding that.
Mm-hmm.
This would just be adding an extra day to that.
Yeah.
Uh,
I think there's like, I think you're totally right. I think there's probably somewhat more studies that need to be done, because like this was a very comprehensive study. But to your point, like so many businesses and industries are all different, and ultimately, like there's no amount of, well, not no amount, but it's unrealistic that like an increase in productivity will compensate for just overworked employees. If you just
Yeah.
are expecting too much from the people that you have in your organization, shortening the amount of time they have to do that work is not going to solve the problem.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
to your point, it's about how you do it, not just that you do it. But I like the push to change the standard. I like the push to set an average, like a standard work week at 32 hours, because what it does is it encourages a change in mindset, encourages focus on efficiency, and it basically makes it so that the incentives are set up so that companies are solving for time outside of work for their employees.